No one saw it coming. Not the generals, not the strategists, not even the proud pilots of the United States Air Force. But it happened, and when it did, silence filled the command rooms, because a jet they once dismissed just humiliated the U.S. Air Force. For decades, the U.S. ruled the skies, from the thunder of the F-15 Eagle to the stealth of the F-22 Raptor. Air superiority wasn't a question, it was a guarantee. Every nation wanted to match the Americans, but none could. Their technology was ahead, their budget was endless. And their confidence, unshakable. Then came a new era. The F-35, America's flying supercomputer, promised to redefine air combat forever. It could see before being seen, it could strike before being detected. It was meant to be untouchable. But somewhere across the ocean, in the cold hangars of a small European nation, another story was being written. Not by a superpower, not with trillions, but with brains, precision, and a quiet kind of defiance. Sweden's Saab Gripen, a jet that costs less than half an F-35. Yet just delivered a lesson no one in Washington expected. In a world obsessed with stealth, Sweden took a different path. They didn't chase invisibility, they chased adaptability. Where others built complexity, Sweden built clarity, and that decision just paid off big time. During recent NATO air exercises, the kind where the world's best pilots go head-to-head, Gripen S from Sweden and partner nations went up against some of the most advanced Western fighters, including the F-35. What happened next? Even the Americans didn't believe it at first. Reports began leaking out. Quietly, unofficially. The cheap Swedish jet was consistently outsmarting its expensive counterparts. It wasn't supposed to. It wasn't allowed to. But the data didn't lie. The Gripen E's electronic warfare systems, its SAD's digital brain, could jam, confuse, and mislead opposing sensors with brutal efficiency. In plain English, it made the F-35 blind. Critics had laughed for years. They called the Gripen a budget toy. They said Sweden couldn't possibly challenge the technological monster that was the U.S. Air Force. But while others poured billions into stealth coatings and classified sensors, Sweden invested in something far more disruptive: information warfare. Think of it this way: while the F-35 hides in the dark, the Gripen E controls the lights. It doesn't need to be invisible. It just makes you look the wrong way. And when radar operators saw their screens flicker and their locks vanish mid-exercise, they realized this wasn't luck. This was design. But humiliation doesn't happen in one flight. It builds over years, through arrogance, assumptions, and denial. For the U.S. Air Force, that moment came when its most advanced platforms found themselves digitally outgunned by a jet that can take off from a 500-meter road and be refueled by 5 mechanics with a truck. No massive airbase, no million-dollar maintenance hangar, just a highway, a wrench, and Swedish engineering. And that's the part that truly stung. Because the Gripen E was designed for survival, not showmanship. It's not a trophy fighter, it's a survivor's fighter. Every system, every line of code, every screw was built around one idea. What if the enemy destroys everything? The US builds aircraft to win wars. Sweden builds them to outlast wars. When the results of that exercise circulated through NATO channels, the reactions were telling. Pilots couldn't stop talking about how nimble and unpredictable the Gripen felt. Commanders were stunned by how fast it could adapt to electronic threats, almost like it was thinking on its own. And for the Americans, the embarrassment wasn't just that a smaller nation had beaten them. It was that Sweden had done it smarter, faster, and cheaper. Because while an F-35 costs around $80, $100 million, a Gripen E costs roughly $30 to $35 million, and still competes toe-to-toe in combat simulations. And when you factor in maintenance, the difference becomes even more brutal. Every hour of F-35 flight costs about $40,000. Greits. Gerstijs. Intern de Steinpoiner Brisbauen. Around $5,000. In the long game, that means one US jet burns through the same money it would take to keep an entire Gripen squadron in the air. Brains over budgets, again. The real shock came when one NATO pilot described the Gripen's electronic warfare suite as like fighting a hacker in the sky. That line spread fast, because it summed up exactly what had just happened. This wasn't about stealth, it wasn't about speed, it was about deception. Gripen doesn't just dodge missiles, it tricks them. It doesn't just jam radars, it feeds them false data. So while enemy jets are chasing ghosts, the real Gripen is already behind them, missile locked, quietly smiling. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The US built a jet so advanced it needed a small army of engineers to keep it running. Sweden built one so simple it can be serviced by a handful of conscripts on a frozen road. One jet demands a hangar and Wi-Fi. The other just asks for fuel and a fight. And that's why the recent results hit so hard. Because when the dust settled, the small, overlooked Gripen wasn't just a competitor anymore, it was a teacher. It exposed how the modern air war isn't just about who flies higher or faster, it's about who thinks faster. Even inside the Pentagon, analysts began asking uncomfortable questions. If a small Scandinavian country can achieve this level of performance with a fraction of the budget, what does that say about American defense spending? What happens when strategy beats spending? Meanwhile, countries that had long relied on US aircraft started rethinking their options. Brazil already flies the Gripen. Thailand, the Czech Republic, and Hungary swear by it. Even nations like Canada, India, and Finland, all under immense US pressure to buy the F-35, took long, serious looks at the Swedish design. They saw what happened in those NATO drills. They saw who won. And they started to wonder, maybe the future of air combat isn't American after all. Make no mistake, the US Air Force remains a titan. Its reach, resources, and experience are unmatched. But for the first time in decades, a small, humble jet from a neutral country showed that even titans can trip. And that's what makes this story remarkable. Because it wasn't about humiliation for the sake of pride. It was a reminder that innovation doesn't need billions, it needs belief. Sweden believed that intelligence could outperform invisibility, that efficiency could outlast extravagance. And, in those exercises, they proved it. The Gripen didn't humiliate the US because it was better on paper, it humiliated the US because it redefined what better even means. So now, every air force in the world is paying attention, because the message is loud and clear. Stealth can be countered, money can be wasted, but smart design, that endures. As the Gripen E continues to evolve, integrating new electronic warfare systems, new radars, new partnerships, it's doing something far bigger than competing. It's changing the rules of the game. And that's why this small Scandinavian jet has done what no one expected. It forced the world's most powerful air force to look in the mirror. At the end of the day, air power isn't about who spends the most, it's about who learns the fastest. And when the smoke clears, when the satellites fade, and the world's radar screens go dark, one truth will remain. Sweden didn't build the biggest jet, they built the smartest. And that's how a quiet little Gripen, the jet nobody took seriously, just humiliated the United States Air Force. At the end of the day, air power isn't about who spends the most, it's about who learns the fastest. And when the smoke clears, when the satellites fade, and the world's radar screens go dark, one truth will remain. Sweden didn't build the biggest jet, they built the smartest. And that's how a quiet little Gripen, the jet nobody took seriously, just humiliated the United States Air Force.